Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Anthropology 310 Origins of Human Diversity. It is the 8th of November. It is Friday of week 12. We're in Old World Civilizations. We got a homework number 8 and discussion board number 9 this week. Remember, there's no quiz this week. Homework number 8, you're going to watch the rest of the Tobar movie and answer about 6 questions. And then in discussion board number 9, you're going to talk about how if you were a Natufian and you came to civilization, what are some of those traits you would see and why that would be exciting for you. Okay, so today we're going to talk about two more old world civilizations, ancient Egypt and ancient India, or the Indus River Valley right here. And these both arose about 500 years after Mesopotamia, and they were kind of the consummate trading partners with Mesopotamia. We're going to talk about a couple of these other areas this week, but you can imagine if you were a trader here in ancient Sumer, it's easy to head on over here to ancient Egypt, or to go in the Persian Gulf in your boat all the way down to the next major river, which is the Indus, or to go out here to the Mediterranean and go out to Crete, which is where we'll talk about our ancient Greek civilization. So a lot of these areas here, they arose after Egypt. And they have many of the same traits, but also, or after Mesopotamia, but also kind of did their own thing, right? So this interesting mix of both continuity between these civilizations as well as some major differences for us to understand how these things are not all exactly the same. Okay. One thing you might notice about all of these civilizations, especially these four we'll talk about, Greek's going to be a little different because it's on an island. But these four that we're going to talk about this week, ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus River Valley, and China, all grew up around these river valleys. Why do you think that would have been important? And the Egypt one is especially important, the Nile River. Yeah, for irrigation, for agriculture, you're going to need to produce a lot of people. And if you think about these parts of the world, if you go just a little bit in different directions, like if we're here and we go down south, we end up in the Arabian Peninsula. It's desert. We're in ancient Egypt and we head a little bit southwest. We're in the Sahara Desert, right? If we're in this part up here, we go a little northwest. We're in Mongolia, kind of the steppe. So in all these areas, again, here you go a little northeast, you're in the Himalayas. So all these areas are really fertile pockets along these river valleys, which allowed people to grow more food and have bigger societies than ever before. So we're going to look at two of these, ancient Egypt and ancient India today. We'll start with ancient Egypt. And probably what I think is ancient Egypt is really interesting, mostly because of how much it's in our pop culture. You might have heard of ancient Mesopotamia kind of vaguely, and probably ancient India. You're probably like, I don't know. I'm sure there was something there, but probably you don't really have a great grasp of what's going on. In contrast to Egypt, what do you know about ancient Egypt? Are you all are aware, right? It's probably the most famous. Before we started this class, I was like, "What's an ancient civilization?" You're probably like Egypt, right? What do we know about ancient Egypt? Pharaohs? Yeah, home of the pharaohs, right? And where do they hang out? Where are they hanging out now? Besides the British Museum. In pyramids. Yeah, they got pyramids. What else they got there? They got pyramids, they got pharaohs, catacombs, sphinxes. Yeah, sphinxes. What about their writing? They got writing. Hieroglyphics, yeah, hieroglyphic writing. Kind of all we might have, if you go into like Bible school or something or Sunday school, you might have heard like stories of Moses and the Pharaoh growing up, right? And the slaves and the Egyptian society, how you have this really big difference between how the pharaohs are living and how the slaves might have lived at the time, right? A lot of these kind of hallmarks of ancient civilization. And in many ways, Egypt is like the prototypical one. Like there's a lot of difference between elites and poor people. There's a lot of hierarchy. There's written language. There's laws. There's monumental architecture, there's agriculture, craft specialization, and it's really to the forefront of a lot of these things that we think of as like essential to civilization. Okay. And they are amazing. Actually, let me start with a video. I'll start with a video, just kind of briefly introducing you to ancient Egypt, and then we'll talk about some of the awesome things that they invented.
Ancient Egyptian civilization lasted for over 3,000 years and became one of the most powerful and iconic civilizations in history. time, ancient Egypt's empire stretched as far north as modern-day Syria and as far south as today's Sudan. But long before it was an empire, ancient Egypt was a series of small, independent city-states that bloomed along North Africa's Nile River. The city-states were divided into two regions and named according to the flow of the Nile. Upper Egypt in the south, which was upstream, and Lower Egypt in the north, which was downstream. By about 3100 BC, the two halves united, thereby creating one Egyptian state that lasted for millennia. The reign of this civilization can be divided into three major periods of prosperity, called the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms, and two periods of instability in between, called the First and Second Intermediate Periods. Guiding the Egyptian people was a succession of about 300 rulers, often referred to as pharaohs. Pharaoh, which means great house in Egyptian, was never the ruler's formal title. It only became synonymous with the ruling individual in modern times, thanks to its use in the Hebrew Bible. These rulers, who were not always men, nor Egyptian, were considered protectors of the people and served as divine liaisons between humanity and the hundreds of gods they worshipped. After the rulers passed away, ancient Egyptians believed they then became gods. To prepare their journey into the afterlife, the rulers constructed elaborate tombs, including the Great Pyramids of Giza and underground mausoleums in the Valley of the Kings. Rulers filled their tombs with all the items they could need in the afterlife, including gold, jewelry, food, drink, and even pets. Preparing for this journey to the gods also involved mummifying one's body. The deceased's corpse was involved, wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen, placed inside the tomb so the body could be reanimated in the afterlife. To this day, structures like the Great Pyramids are a testament to the role of religion in ancient Egyptian lives. But they also represent the innovative and cultural might of the Egyptian people. Innovations in mathematics and written language in particular propelled their civilization to success. Math, specifically measurement mathematics, helped Egyptians understand and harness the world with numbers like no other civilization had before. They developed a new form of measurement called the cubit. It was used to design massive structures, such as the Great Pyramid, with remarkable geometrical precision. The Egyptians also measured time. By combining mathematics with astronomy, they established a 24-hour division to the day and created a solar calendar, which was the first dating system in history to feature 365 days in 1 year. Lastly, Egyptians developed methods to measure and survey land around the Nile River. These civil engineering feats made way for the construction of dams, canals, and irrigation systems that helped farming and agriculture to flourish in the Nile Valley. In addition to mathematical concepts, the ancient Egyptians also created written languages to describe the world around them. The oldest and probably most well-known of these is hieroglyphic writing. This system was developed around 3150 BC during the Old Kingdom and has over 700 pictorial characters. It was used to inscribe monuments and pottery and predominantly served a decorative or ceremonial purpose. Soon after, another ancient form of writing, called hieratic, developed out of the hieroglyphic system. It was a form of cursive that was written in ink and served a more functional purpose. Unlike its more formal predecessor, hieratic was written on another ancient Egyptian innovation, papyrus. Papyrus was a type of paper derived from the papyrus plant, which grew plentifully along the Nile River. This medium gave the ancient Egyptians a new avenue of communication and record keeping that allowed their civilization's administrative skill to grow and their culture to spread for thousands of years. As with all great empires, ancient Egypt came to an end. It was eventually conquered after a series of invasions, including those by the Persian Empire in the 4th century BC and the Roman Empire around 30 BC. Not many civilizations can claim a lifespan of over 3,000 years, let alone one that made vast cultural contributions that still resonate in modern times. Ancient Egypt, with its linguistic and mathematical innovations, spirituality and religion, and extensive political and military might, set a high standard for all civilizations that followed.
Okay, again, you get it's kind of this buffet version of ancient Egypt and just see some of the kind of amazing things that they're known for. Probably a lot of those you're already familiar with compared to some of the other civilizations we're going to talk about, whether it's pharaohs and mummies, pyramids and sphinxes, astronomy and priests, land surveys, civil engineering, hieroglyphics written on papyrus, kind of the combination between politics and religion, right? These are all kind of the hallmarks of what we think of about ancient Egypt, both kind of scientifically as well as like if you see any pop culture kind of stuff about ancient Egypt, if you watch like the Mummy movie or Prince of Egypt or anything like that, right? We have a really pretty good grasp in our society of how ancient Egypt might have looked, at least our perception of it. Like you saw in the video, there's a whole bunch of these kind of innovations which are well known about ancient Egypt. First of these is a base 10, right? We talked about ancient ancient Mesopotamia before, and they had what kind of math system? Base 60, right? 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. And but that's kind of pretty much the only 360 degrees in a circle. But that's pretty much the legacy of that in our culture. Versus ancient Egypt, the base 10, this is the basis of all the math that we're doing today, right? After you get 8, 9, you get to 10, you start the next column, right? We got 1 in the tens column and 0 in the single digit columns, right? And this is also the basis of geometry. If you're building big pyramids, you need to know how to do your math and to make things pretty straight. And we actually see some of these really early pyramids, the famous bent pyramid, right? Some of these early pyramids, their math was not quite right, and they had to kind of abandon them halfway through or change how they look. But by the time we get to like the Great Pyramids at Giza, they're pretty technically skilled at creating those things. We also get the 24-hour in a day, and you might be like, how do I get there from tens, right? 10, base 10, how do I get to 24? It's because Egyptians had 10 hours of daytime, 10 hours of nighttime, and then an hour on each end is like the in between. So like, the beginning of your day is like this liminal hour as you go from day to or night to day. Then you got 10 hours of daytime, and then an hour as you go from day to night. And then the same for the evening. So 10 plus 10 plus 2 plus 2 equals 24. They are great astronomers as well, like we'll talk about with Maya people next time, as well as or next week, along with the Mesopotamians. Right, this is astronomy is to track the stars and the planets, but it's not in the sense that we do it today, where these are just kind of inert balls of gases floating millions of miles away. These were seen as tangible representations of supernatural deities, which could influence the health and well-being of the people. And oftentimes the pharaoh and his accompanying priests were acting as intercessors between the common people and the deities. We also see lots of irrigation systems, just like how we talked about in Mesopotamia. Oh, a picture of it. These are massive series of irrigation stretching out a couple miles from the sides of the banks of the Nile. Not only just ditches, but also kind of retaining walls, and we got dams, and we got retention ponds, right? Because this is a desert area, and the Nile, which is the major river that flows through Egypt, flows from down here and in the south and flows up north. Flooded on a yearly cycle, and so part of the year you had too much water, and part of the year you had not enough. And so a lot of kind of the king's role and responsibility was almost managerial, right? Trying to figure out how to manage this flood cycle, because it was really important to have the floods because it brought the kind of silt which replenished the nutrients in the soil. But if you if you weren't prepared, the floods could wash away your towns and villages. And if you're in the dry season and you didn't have any way of retaining water, your crops aren't going to make it through the dry part of the year. Yeah, mummification, we'll talk about that in a second, as well as hieroglyphic writing. I'll show you some stuff on that as well. It arose just slightly after Mesopotamia, about 500 years afterwards, but is pretty contemporaneous, or if not just slightly after. When we talk about, bless you, we talk about ancient Egypt, we're talking about the Nile. There are earlier societies. It seems like maybe early agriculture actually develops slightly to the west of here, out where it's currently desert, right? And there were these playas or kind of oases where it seems to kind of at the end of the last ice age where agricultural seems to develop. But as that gets hotter and drier, people start to move over to the river valley because it offers a kind of a year-round supply of water for doing agriculture. Ancient Egypt, like you saw in the video, originally starts off as a number of different city-states. It's very similar to what we see in Mesopotamia, where you get, in Mesopotamia, it's Ur and Uruk, and Babylon and places like that. Here we got Memphis, we got Thebes, we got Aswan, right? These kind of famous ancient Egyptian cities. And eventually, they start to form larger and larger groups. Cities start to take over each other. And we get two different Egyptian states. We get Upper Egypt, which is confusingly at the bottom of the map, and Lower Egypt, which is at the top of the map. They're not just being tricky, it's the direction that the river flows. So Upper Egypt is upstream, Lower Egypt is downstream by the Nile Delta. And then, about 5,000 years ago, the first pharaohs to unite Upper and Lower Egypt into kind of the empire, which we think of as kind of characteristic of ancient Egypt. What else? We see lots of social differentiation in ancient Egyptian archaeology, right? Especially in the funeral practices. Sometimes this is pretty apparent, right? Pharaohs when they die, they get put in a big pyramid or in a tomb. They got lots of gold mask and treasures and stuff of those, and peasants and slaves, they don't get none of that, right? They get buried in a hole in the ground or get used as backfill in a pyramid.
Just Tut.
King Tut. Yeah, King Tut. And if you ever get a chance to see it, when I was a kid, they had like the tour of King Tut's treasures, and you could go to different museums around the country and see the golden mask and see kind of the funerary, right, objects. Here's some examples of things, whether it's these kind of alabaster vases, copper bowls and discs. We got daggers. He actually has this cool like dagger made out of a meteorite. It's like a really space dagger. And again, this is part of the burial tradition of elites. It helps us know that there is a big difference in society between the people who have a lot of stuff and the people who don't. Probably most famously, when you do get buried with as a king, you get buried in a pyramid. Right? This is the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Khufu Pyramid, and there's kind of a series of three of them there. About 2500 BC, so about 4,500 years ago. It's a limestone building, and we see pyramids today, and they look we're like, that looks ratty. That's kind of junky looking. But they would have been smooth, and they would have had this kind of white exterior. These were taken probably during the medieval era to build buildings in Cairo and to build mosques and churches and stuff. They took the cool outside facing stones and then this kind of gold pyramid thing on top of it to reflect the sun. It's a really amazing structure. It's precisely 756 feet on each side, 450 foot tall, 2,300,000 blocks, each weighing about 2.5 tons. What's really amazing to me is just kind of the precision of this, right? No side is more than 8 inches longer than the other one, and it's oriented perfectly towards cardinal directions. It's not the kind of thing that like you can mess up and be like, oops, we need to slightly shift it over. And it was for thousands of years, this was the biggest building in the world. It's pretty amazing. Like if you look at big buildings now, every couple of years or decades, like now we got a newest big building. But up until, like 4,500 years or so, this was the largest building, and even recently until like 1874, this was the largest building in the world, which is pretty amazing. Inside of the pyramid is what? What do you put in there? Yeah, mummies, right? Curse of the Mummies. And you might have heard this, right? King Tut's, I just saw like 120 something years ago. King Tut's tomb was discovered 108 years ago. And you might have heard like the curse of the mummy, right? And oftentimes there was this idea that these mummies were cursed or there was some kind of spell put on the tombs, right? And there was a lot of religious iconography around them. And then you open up the tomb, and inside you find this mummified person. We're going to talk about mummies in lots of different cultures around the world. Egypt's not the only one to come up with this idea, but it does seem to be taken to like the most extreme in this society. Yeah, how do they do it? Yeah, tell us.
First, they have to cut all their organs out.
Yeah.
They put their organs in the jar.
Yeah. Those jars right here.
I'm not joking.
It's guts in the jar. Canoptic jars. What do you do with your brain?
They take out their nose.
Yeah, you just like fish it out through the nose because the heart was considered to be the center of intelligence, not your brain.
The body is salted and dried for about 40 something days.
Yeah, 40, 50 days. You dry it.
Wrap it, glue it, throw it into.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually amazing for us.
I think it's animated, but if I saw it in real life, I probably would.
Yeah, probably. And this actually, scientists think that this developed out of a natural process, these kind of nitrate deposits out in the Sahara Desert where people were originally buried. The salt just like sucks the moisture out of you. And so you get these like, it's like shriveled raisin looking people. But then the Egyptians saw this and they kind of perfected it, right? Then they started to like take bodies and pack salt around it. And they realized that all the goopy stuff inside was not helping. So taking all of that out as a way to like, and then packing salt, drying stuff inside of it as a way to get all that moisture out, because that's what makes things rot, right? It's the moisture. And so if you take all the moisture out, you can preserve it. And there was this idea that you would preserve it because in the afterlife, having a body was great because then you could come back to life and reanimate your body and go about your business in the next life. It's also the reason that you see all those cool treasures in ancient Egyptian tombs, whether it's funerary objects, carts, chariots, horses, and even slaves who might help you in the next life. It's all because they had this very real idea that like who you were in this life will transfer over to the next, and so it's good to have your stuff. Another major thing that we know about ancient Egypt is art. If we look at these tombs, they're covered in art. Oftentimes we get these really cool displays, often with colors still on them. Other places we see, large scale monumental architecture. Here's the Abu Simbel, kind of these like large pyramids or large statues of Ramses, and they're covered in writing called what? Hieroglyphics. Yeah, hieroglyphics, right? Yeah, and these are pictures. It's a very old system of writing. It's almost as old as cuneiform. And it's a pictograph system of writing. Oftentimes, most symbols are depicting logographs or words. Sometimes they do go together to like make longer phrases. And ancient Egypt is really interesting because it's one of the ancient civilizations where we can actually read their writing. The second one we'll talk about, ancient Indus River Valley. They have writing, but we've never been able to decipher it. So we don't really have that firsthand look at what's going on in society. But in ancient Egypt, we do. And again, why might that be important? What can we get out of that? Yeah, we can actually have history instead of myth or mythology, right? About those, what do we think they might have been? We can actually see like this king was doing this year. They interacted with trade with this other king or with the kingdom. They conquered this land, and we get a much better idea. The reason that we can do this is because of what famous artifact? That's a good quiz question. How do we know how to read hieroglyphics? What's it called? Yeah, it's a big tablet. It's black. Got 3 different kinds of writing. It's called the Rosetta Stone. Have you ever taken one of those like computer courses? Like, I want to learn how to speak German. Buy Rosetta Stone, right? That's what it's named after. This is it was discovered by one of Napoleon's guys. They were tromping around Egypt in the 1800s. Jean-Francois Champion. He found this, or when they found it, they're like, oh, we don't know what this means. what they started to realize was this tablet, this really large tablet, it's a big stone, and it's broken. We don't have the whole thing, but what we see is that there's writing on it, and there's three different forms of writing. There's Greek, there's Demotic, and there's hieroglyphic. And Champion was actually able to read both the Greek and the Demotic, Coptic, and was able to say that, hey, I read two of those three languages. I can't read the third one, but I recognize that it's the same message in this one and in this one, right? So my hypothesis is that the third one is probably what? Same, right? So if I can read this one, I can read this one. I have a good idea what this one's already about. And what I can do, what I actually did was identify names, right? He saw a name of a king in here and then saw that same name up here. And then you can use that as kind of a landmark in your study. You're able to kind of figure out these markers. It's very similar to how they discovered the cipher Maya. And then you can trace that back into this earlier form of writing, because both the Demotic and the hieroglyphs are both in Egyptian language. So there's the same language, just written in different scripts. And hieroglyphs is a really interesting pastime. And I was like doing research for this presentation. I found that some online courses where it's like, learn how to read hieroglyphics. Like, we'll do this with ancient Maya hieroglyphics too. One of the coolest things that I think is ongoing in terms of like ancient Egypt and hieroglyphics is that this new program, this is from Google, this Arts and Culture project, about using AI to understand hieroglyphs. I'll show you this little. You can put it into, this is Google Arts and Culture. It's called Fabricus. And this is basically a walkthrough. You can take a picture. I went to Egypt. I took a picture of the wall, right? I want to know what it says. How do I do that? Put it into Google, and it takes basically a black and white picture. It gets rid of kind of all the other stuff. It's really blurry. And then you basically clean it up. Right, again, we're getting closer. You take your little pen tool and you help it figuring out what's actually important and what's kind of just trash. You add in some stuff. You use the eraser tool to take away all the kind of just the debris around it. And once you've actually gotten the symbols, you kind of mark them out. And then you go down here. Keep going. Yeah. And it will actually, it'll start to identify what those symbols are or what they are likely to be. And then once you do, you can add, it'll give you options about like, hey, here's this G39 symbol. Here's like 5 or 6 different things that it could be. It could be someone's name. It could be, this one is, there's one where they so you go down there and you can select which one, and then it will kind of create this translation for you, right? Sun, mouth, true voice. And it turns out to be someone's name, right? Because we have this determinant that shows us that it's a name. And then so we know that the text says Sarai, or the true voice, right? That's somebody's title as an ancient Egyptian king. I think it's super cool. And we had one of our students working on this for ancient Maya. I don't know how far they got with it. But a cool way of like taking the archaeological, figureful kind of data and putting it into a modern context and using the powers of computers to help us understand the past. And it's also really great because you get these, oftentimes it's hard to find really clean inscriptions, right? If you have something like this, it's hard to know what certain things are, but we can have the computer help clean us up so we know a little bit better. Okay. 15 minutes or so left. We're going to jump on over to our last civilization today, the Indus River Valley. It's slightly confusing because we would think Indus is probably in India, but it's actually centered on the Indus River, which is in today modern day Pakistan, right? Like before 1950 or so, this was all Indian Raj. But after kind of the partition of India, this is mostly over here. It does extend in both directions into modern day India, as well as Afghanistan and Iran, but primarily focused on this river valley. And again, I'm going to show you just a quick little 5-minute video. We can have John Green teach us this time about ancient Indus River or the Harappan civilization. Then we'll talk about some of their achievements before we leave today.
My favorite. The Indus Valley civilization was located in the floodplain of the Indus and Suwardi rivers. It was about the best place in the world to have an ancient civilization because the rivers flooded very reliably twice a year, which meant that it had the most available calories per acre of pretty much anywhere on the planet. We know the Indus Valley civilization flourished a long time ago, probably around 3000 BCE. Why is that question literally hanging over my head? But people of the Indus Valley were trading with Mesopotamians as early as 3500 BCE. We also know that it was the largest of the ancient civilizations. Archaeologists have discovered more than 1,500 sites. So what do we know about this civilization? Let's go to the thought bubble. Everything we know about the Indus Valley civilization comes from archaeology, because while they did use written language, we don't know how to read it, and no Rosetta Stone has thus far appeared to help us learn it. I meant the other Rosetta Stone thought bubble. Yeah. Although, come to think of it, either would be acceptable. So here's what we know. They had amazing cities. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are the best known, with dense, multi-story homes constructed out of uniformly sized bricks along perpendicular streets. I mean, this wasn't some ancient world version of Houston, more like Chicago. This means they must have had some form of government and zoning, but we don't know what gave this government its authority. Cities were oriented to catch the wind and provide a natural form of air conditioning. And they were clean. Most homes were connected to a centralized drainage system that used gravity to carry waste and water out of the city in big sewer ditches that ran under the main avenues, a plumbing system that would have been the envy of many 18th century European cities. Also, in Mohenjo-Daro, the largest public building was not a temple or a palace, but a public bath, which historians call the Great Bath. We don't know what the Great Bath was used for, but since later Indian culture placed a huge emphasis on ritual purity, which is the basis for the caste system, some historians have speculated that the bath might have been like a giant baptismal pool. Also, they traded. One of the coolest things that the Indus Valley civilization produced were seals used as identification markers on goods and clay tablets. These seals contain the writing that we still can't decipher and a number of fantastic designs, many featuring animals and monsters. One of the most famous and frightening is of a man with what looks like water buffalo horns on his head, sitting cross-legged between a tiger and a bull. We don't know what's really going on here, but it's safe to say that this was a powerful dude because he seems to be able to control the tiger. How do these seals let us know that they traded? Well, because we found them in Mesopotamia, not the Indus Valley. Plus, archaeologists have found stuff like bronze in the Indus Valley that is not native to the region. So what did they trade? Cotton cloth. Still such a fascinating export, incidentally, that it will be the subject of the 40th and final video in this very series. But here's the most amazing thing about the Indus Valley people. They were peaceful. Despite archaeologists finding 1,500 sites, they have found very little evidence of warfare and almost no weapons. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Okay, before we talk about the fascinating demise of the Indus Valley civilization, it's time for the open letter. Magic! I wonder what the secret compartment has for me today. Oh, fancy clothes! So what happened to these people? Well, here's what didn't happen to them. They didn't morph into the current residents of that area of the world, Hindu Indians or Muslim Pakistanis. Those people probably came from the Caucasus. Instead, sometime around 1750 BCE, the Indus Valley civilization declined until it faded into obscurity. Why? Historians have three theories. One, conquest. Turns out to be a terrible military strategy not to have any weapons, and it's possible people from the Indus Valley were completely overrun by people from the Caucasus. Two, environmental disaster. It's possible they brought about their own end by destroying their environment. Three, earthquake. The most interesting theory is that a massive earthquake changed the course of the rivers so much that a lot of the tributaries dried up. Without adequate water supplies for irrigation, the cities couldn't sustain themselves, so people literally just picked up and left for greener pastures. Well, probably not pastures. It's unlikely they became nomads. They probably just moved to a different plane and continued their agricultural ways. I am already boring you, and I haven't even told you yet how to be a better boy and or girlfriend. I'm going to do that now. So we don't know why the Indus Valley civilization ended, but we also don't really know why it started. Why did these people build cities and dig swimming pools and make unnecessarily ornate seals? Were they motivated by hunger, fear, a desire for companionship, the need to be near their sacred spaces, or a general feeling that city life was just more awesome than foraging? Thinking about what motivated them to structure.
So just again, a brief look into ancient Indus Valley civilization, and there's more of that if you are interested. So let's take a look at some of the innovations they talked about. First of these is that it's just an amazingly well-planned civilization. There's about 1,500 different sites which we found kind of throughout the area, and most of them are laid out amazingly well, right? They are set at streets at 90-degree angles. They often have kind of walls around them that don't seem to be for defense, but almost like placemaking or even to keep water out. They have these large public buildings which are at the center of this. And so it lets us know, and they have not only that, but they have the sewer system, like you saw in the video, right? That carries away waste. So it lets us know that this isn't just a haphazard, amalgamation of people, like a bunch of people setting up a campsite, um, you know, but it's more like there was some kind of planning authority going on, laying out those roads, setting up different districts, like this is where you're supposed to live, this is where temples go, some kind of authority. But unlike ancient Egypt, we don't really see a large difference between the super rich and the super poor. We don't have big pyramids with pharaohs inside where people are sacrificed and put gold and treasure, and other people are just laying in a ditch somewhere. There seems to be a lot more equality in this civilization. We'll talk about some other ways we know that. A lot of things surrounding water, whether it's water for agriculture and irrigation, large public and private baths, both like city buildings as well as in each house, as well as public wells to bring water into the city and sewers to take water out of the city. It seemed like they were really kind of obsessed with water, and it's not surprising because it's such a major part of their society. We do see these large brick walls around, and it's really interesting, like you saw in the video, they don't seem to have weapons or they don't seem to be warfare oriented towards warfare. So there's a lot of question about like, what are these walls? And a lot of archaeologists now think they're for flooding, right? They keep the water from outside of the city, and they're almost like, if you've ever been to like the Mississippi River, like in St. Louis or something, they have big flood walls along the river. Here's kind of a reconstruction of Harappa, one of the largest cities. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are probably the two biggest. All the cities seem to be organized according to a central plan, right? Like if you go over to Harappa, if you go to Mohenjo-Daro, even though they're not near each other, and there doesn't seem to be some kind of overlord king or emperor running everything, they seem to be set up the same way. Like maybe there's some kind of underlying cultural plan of how you're supposed to set up a city. And here's what you would go if you went to Pakistan today and you wanted to see Mohenjo-Daro. This is what it would look like. Again, you get lots of these pretty closely packed urban centers, lots of people. But again, like these kind of water centric. Here's a well, and this is kind of a great bath that you can people used to bathe in. We see, what else do we see? We see lots of artifacts. There we go. Both kind of figures of animals as well as people, and maybe some kind of mythical, supernaturally kind of things. We get burials, people being buried with pots. And we get this interesting system of writing, of seals with writing. It's very similar to how in ancient Mesopotamia, how it starts off as seals that show like, I'm putting grain in the storehouse. This is my picture, right? Almost like a coat of arms. This is my picture because I know that's my grain or something like that. But pretty quickly, people start to make marks on it and start to elaborate on it. And like you saw in the video, unlike ancient Egypt or even Mesopotamia, where we can read the cuneiform and the hieroglyphs, there hasn't been anyone successful in trying to decipher this. So if you are interested in epigraphy or even in computer technology and you want to use this Google AI technology to try to discover what these things say, I would be happy to claim you as one of my students someday when you're famous. What else? We're almost out of time. We'll do 2 more slides. Like you saw in the video, this was a trading civilization. If they're located really ideally between right here, and we see trade both to the west between Mesopotamia, which is again easy. You just hop in your boat and sail up the Persian Gulf. We see bronze coming from this way and other metal objects being traded east, and then cloth, especially cotton cloth grown in the Indus Valley, being processed and sent west, as well as trade with China over here. So kind of this kind of crossroads between different civilizations, bringing East and West together. This was done both by boat. You can hop into your boat and sail, or once they domesticated animals, especially with camels, kind of overland, what we think of like caravan trade, where you pack up all your stuff on this camel and we travel overland to get the stuff that we need. And finally, like you saw in the video, there is the question of what happened. These cities seem to be abandoned all around the same time. And another group comes in, the kind of ancestral population of modern day India and Pakistan, people from like the Caucasus, people who are speaking the kind of Proto-Indo-European, the language that's kind of distantly related to the languages we speak, European languages that most of us speak today. And there's been a lot of theories, right? Maybe they were conquered by these invading people because they had swords and shields and weapons, and the people in Harappa, they weren't really into war. Maybe there was a natural disaster. Maybe the floods didn't come on a certain year. Maybe there's an earthquake that shifted the natural course of the river, and you've already built your city over here, and now the river has moved over here. Or there's some kind of climactic change which has disrupted your society. Or probably, because it's our anthropology and archaeology, it's probably all of it, right? Probably there was some environmental problems, either earthquakes or floods or not enough water, too much water, destabilized the civilization, made them easy pickings for outside invaders who came in and brought a new way of life, which we would think of as like ancient India, right? Like with like the Rig Vedas and kind of Indo-European Sanskrit kind of writing. And so today it's still one of these kind of more mysterious civilizations, not nearly as well known as ancient Egypt or ancient Mesopotamia. But I think in the future, especially as the forms of writing are increasingly uncovered and deciphered, we'll get to learn a lot more about it, and maybe it will become more popular. So that's all the time we have for today. Next time, we're going to talk about, on Monday, we'll finish up our tour of old world civilizations, doing ancient China, and then we're going to go the other way, and we're talk about some ancient Greece. That will be it. And then we'll move over to the New World on Wednesday. So that's it for today. Remember to do your homework, watch the Tobar movie, and answer those questions. And then a discussion board, no quiz this week. So lucky you. What was that? On your discussion board, you post something and then you respond to at least one other person.
That's why I got to comment.
Yeah, just make sure you comment. And if you did get a grade, like you got an 8 because you posted and didn't comment, it doesn't show us if you post again. So you might have to just email me and Jose and be like, hey, I posted my comment. Please update my grade. Okay, thanks so much for hanging out. See you next time.